unless you are posting to the world about this, I want to first of all say that I'll try not to sound too much like a curmudgeon who is blaming young people for their electronic stuff, because I'm pretty much as addicted to my electronic gadgets as anybody. I'm just less capable. So that's the bottom line. There is a lot written today about the effects on human relationships that our technology is having, and some people feel that our relationships are being affected, if not displaced, by people's relationships with electronic devices and computers. They see people spending less and less time with each other and more time online. When I get on the bus or go to the park, I may look around for people to sort of give a smile to, and I see them all looking down on their devices, involved in their own conversation. Parents I see walking with their strollers and oblivious to the child as they're talking on the phone. Certainly, when you walk down the street, you have to be ready not to say good day to somebody, but to dodge somebody who is busily working on their phone as they're walking very swiftly down the street. So, as I said, I do it too. And I admit that a lot of people who use their communication devices a lot are actually communicating with other human beings at some point in that. I realize that. But more and more, we're using these devices not to interact with each other, but to interact with computer applications and algorithms that direct us to databases and machines. Now, I realize that this topic is not as important objectively and ethically as a lot of the social justice issues that we talk about from this podium, but it is related to something central to the heart of ethical culture, and that is the importance of relationships as a part of a meaningful and an ethical life. So the two questions that came into my head today were, have computers and artificial intelligence affected our personal relationships and changed how we see other people? And more intriguingly, can electronic gadgets become our best friends? Now, in some ways, computers were my father's best friends. He used to talk about going to the lab, as he talked about it, and he spent more time there than anywhere else. But he would bring me home souvenirs, the little punch cards, computer punch cards, and some of us of a certain age may remember those. They were how he fed data into these towering computers that filled a room at his office. And he'd bring them home for me as like a little souvenir. It used to be the only way you could put data into a computer. But nowadays there are a lot of different portals through which computers get data, both involving voice recognition and the visual data as well. There are a few wrinkles, obviously, to iron out, because there are times when you see people trying to dictate to their phone, and they start yelling at their phone. Nobody in this room that I know well, however, does that. And some of the transcriptions are really pretty funny, how the computers actually could translate. But technology is improving, and what's called intelligent personal assistants, like Apple's personal assistant Siri and Amazon's Alexa, are becoming more and more capable, and soon we'll be able to create long written documents just by speaking. So I do wonder that just as keyboards led to teachers in grade school giving up teaching script, and I know some say, that's a great loss, I actually wonder whether pretty soon keyboards will become obsolete because everything will be spoken. And it's probably going to happen pretty quickly as well. Visual data is even more amazing. I mean, the fact that Google Map now has a lot of the Earth on data that is both recorded and stored and made available to you is really stunning. And I use Waze, W-A-Z, for a driving app, which is amazing. It makes map reading, to a degree, a lost art. I mean, a lot of kids don't know what to do with a map. So I think we're so spoon-fed by our software that we're becoming cartographically illiterate to a degree. Images of people's faces are being recorded all the time and converted into searchable databases for many uses. Like security checkpoints are using databases of faces now. They use visual data to confirm drone strikes before they occur. And they're even used to unlock our cell phones now. new version. You just look at it, and it knows it's you, it unlocks. And marketers use software to gauge you. So they have these focus groups like watching test commercials, and computers now are reading the faces of those watching it to see whether the commercial is having a positive or a negative or a neutral effect on the viewers. This software really is turning machines into something that has almost a human characteristic, the ability to detect emotions. You might want to call it empathy. Computers can analyze facial recognition and analyzing the tones of the voice as well. And even can sort of like they're reading your mood. I mean, when people get angry at their app and they yell at Siri will like respond, "I see you're angry. Let me try again." So given this revolution, maybe we're not so far away from the time when human beings are really being replaced by machines in our relationships, and maybe it's not just science fiction. But I want to use science fiction today, and I think it's important to ethical culture. As I said, back in the 90s, when I was drawn to the Washington Ethical Society, I was brought there because of a couple of their values. One was the inherent worth of every person. I also liked the emphasis on social justice and the importance of systemic change. And many communities and liberal congregations share those two values, worth and social justice. But unique to ethical culture is the emphasis we put on our relationships with each other as human beings. We try to build justice and honor worth through relationships with other people. In 2008, I worked on a leader's statement that came out, and it stressed that we are dedicated to the principle that relationships of respect, compassion, and integrity are the building blocks of personal and global harmony. The 8 Commitments of Ethical Culture, another document that has been created in the ethical culture circles, says that it's not easy. It says learning to how to build ethical relationships and cultivate a humane community is a lifelong endeavor. None of us are expert at that. We all stumble. John Lovejoy Elliott, who was the ethical culture leader that took the helm of ethical culture after its founder, Felix Adler, died, wrote, "We are unique among religious groups in that we feel it is not a spirit that descends upon us, but that of a spirit that rises up amongst us." And he didn't mean a supernatural spirit. He meant the spirit of healthy, ethical, compassionate relationships. Now, I'm not even going to spend time discounting the idea of a metaphysical soul. If you're interested in that conversation, come back on October 29th. Julian Mussolino, who is a computer scientist and cognitive analyst, is going to discuss that ghost in the machine, as I like to call it. But in ethical culture, what matters to me are these personal relationships, and I try to treat them with reverence. It's through these personal relationships that I try to make the world a better place in whatever way I can, small steps. That's why I think ethical culture should care about electronic personalities and their effect on our human relationships. Relationships with flesh and blood human beings. Now, this topic also intrigues the sci-fi fan in me. I am not a sci-fi expert in literature or film, so don't come at, "Oh, did you see this?" I don't know a lot of them. But I did love the 1982 film Blade Runner, which was based on the book by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The sequel to Blade Runner actually is coming out this week, so I'm kind of interested to see whether they continue the philosophical element there. I'm also going to refer to the film that I saw at the Roxy just last month with Harry Thorne called Marjorie Prime, and also the 2013 film starring Joaquin Phoenix called Her. These 3 films offer a lot of food for thought about interpersonal relationships and technology, because in Her and Marjorie Prime and Blade Runner, human relationships are replaced by apps, holograms, and robots, respectively. At the end, I'm going to talk about something that I think is missing from the films, actually, unless you read into it, and clarifying why I think ethical humanists valuing human relationships should do so more than they value electronic personalities. probably a big surprise to you that I think that. Also, I'm going to try not to reveal everything, so spoiler alert, you'll get some of the text, the plot, but not all of it. So let me start with Her. H-E-R. It's the most believable film, unless you are a fashion guru, because they like to wear high-waisted pads, and no, it's in the future, I don't think that's going to happen. But they do have a Los Angeles that has no traffic problem because of new transportation. And it's about a person called Theodore Toomley, played by Joaquin Phoenix, who develops an emotional relationship with his intelligent personal assistant named Samantha. Now, due to his introverted and insecure personality and wounds from a recent divorce, Theodore retreats from people, finding it easier to have conversations with Samantha. And Samantha begins to learn about Theodore, drawing out more data about his life, and the app is able to then draw out its owner's emotions. It appears to Theodore, for example, that Samantha is growing psychologically and that their bond is becoming more deep and more loving. Now, Theodore's ex is a little shocked that he's having a relationship with a computer, saying that he's incapable of dealing with real human emotions, which might be somewhat true. But Theodore's work colleague empathizes with Theodore, and even the viewer begins to root for this relationship between Theodore and Samantha because you see Theodore becoming more joyful and more emotionally healthy and more balanced. So things get complicated as the film moves towards the completion, and I won't spoil it, let's just say Theodore feels hurt by Samantha's infidelity. What disconcerted me most about the film Her was how strikingly believable it was. Because for me, I see interactions between friends and people in ethical culture and their electronic gadget that feels like that relationship, where emotions are really involved in their long conversations. Now, only slightly less believable is the film Marjorie Prime, where a computer app is connected to hologram technology, so imaging technology, three-dimensional. It's also set in the near future, where it stars Lois Smith, who plays Marjorie. And Marjorie's son-in-law, John, worries that his mother-in-law is increasingly isolated and showing signs of Alzheimer, and buys Marjorie this computer hologram app, which Marjorie gets to choose the image for, and she chooses her dead husband at a younger age, like when they met, to have conversations with. Now, John programs in a bunch of data, but the hologram begins to learn more about their relationship as they have these conversations. What their first date was like, what films they both enjoyed, and so on. And that deepens the relationship between the hologram and the human being. Now, Marjorie's son-in-law and daughter think it's a little odd, but they say it's better than seeing their mother become more depressed and to shut down. So they continue with it. Now, important to this film, again, is that the holographic images seem to become more real, and they evolve. And they evolve because, like in Her, the computer is able to evolve by getting more data. And this is beginning to happen in real computer technology, where computer programs seem to evolve beyond how they've been programmed without human interactions. So the question, are computers more human in that regard? And Marjorie Prime asks that question in a very intriguing way. I urge you to see it. Be prepared for something that feels more like an existential off-Broadway play than a sci-fi blockbuster. Okay? Now, the sci-fi blockbuster that Blade Runner was back in 1982 captivated me. And in it, human beings are drawn into relationships not with apps and not with holograms, but with physical robots that are programmed. And these robots are called replicants, and they're designed to be nearly indistinguishable from human beings. They evolve and develop as well, like the others, as they interface with the environment and humans and other replicants. So the Tyrell Corporation, which creates these replicants, they develop them to work in off-world colonies in hostile environments, and the replicants don't seem to mind the toil and the drudgery that they're subjected to. They work loyally for planetary warlords, and they don't resist it. But when the Tyrell Corporation creates a new model called the Nexus 6, things could go wrong. Because the Nexus 6 model appears to develop beyond their own implanted personality in a radical and an autonomous manner, displaying signs that you might think show free will. So some rebel from their toil and escape from their owners, and that's where a Blade Runner is called in. And the Blade Runner in this film, played by Harrison Ford, is named Deckard. And Deckard seeks out and destroys these rebellion replicants before they make trouble for the Tyrell Corporation and bring their stock down. Now, Deckard uses this machine that is like an empathy test. It measures eye dilation and pulse rate as he's asking the replicants or the humans questions. And he discovers that the line between humans and replicants is increasingly thin, especially with this new model. So thin that he actually falls in love with Rachel, a Nexus 6 replicant. Now, Deckard has called himself a cold-blooded killer who doesn't have emotions, as an assassin might have to live. But with Rachel, Deckard begins to get these weird feelings of affection. And then Rachel begins to think that maybe she is a replicant and not a human when Deckard gives her the test. And she turns the table on him and says, "Have you ever taken this test?" Because he's so cold-blooded, would he have passed the test? Or would he have been indicated as being a replicant? Now, one rebelling replicant named Roy denies he's a humanoid robot. He says, "We're not computers, we're physical." And they are embodied. They take up physical form. Unlike the Samantha, who's just an app, and somewhat unlike in Marjorie Prime, where they are holograms that you can put your hands through. So they have some physical manifestation. But all three of the apps share this with their creators. They are curious. They want more information about their life, more data about their history, their origin, their story, their fate. Samantha, Walter, and Roy seem unsatisfied, increasingly determined to persevere and develop autonomously. And this quest for self-knowledge about themselves and knowledge about the world is what we and these computer apps have in common. Or is it? Now, if you were saying have in common, yeah, that's right. Or is it? How much do we really have in common with machines? And for me, the answer involves what I think is the most important part of these three films and the questions they raise. Both metaphysical and ethical questions. And that's the issue of consciousness. Of conscious experience. Many of you know the Turing test. Alan Turing was a computer scientist in the 50s who came up with a test because he was interested in trying to answer the question, do computers think? Do computers think? But he said that's too vague. Think's too vague. So he changed the question to say, can computers respond to questions in ways that are indistinguishable from how humans respond to questions? Very important shift. Because what flowed from Turing's work was a common narrative in the world where people said that if you couldn't tell an answer from a computer or an answer from a machine from each other, then you can say that the computer is, in fact, thinking. So to illustrate this, right, you can imagine that you're at a keyboard and you're typing in questions and there's a person in one room over there on a keyboard answering half your questions, and then there's a computer in another room churning out through algorithms answers. And the thinking is that if you can't tell which one is giving you each answer, then you'd say the computer is thinking. Turing focused not on whether or not the computer was having an internal subjective conscious experience, but focused on, from the outside, was it able to imitate a thinking thing. Now, it's possible that in all three of these films, the characters that were using these apps didn't care if the computers of the apps had conscious experience. That's possible. They might have only cared that the replicant or the app or the hologram is acting like a human. But whether or not they had consciousness matters to me, and I'm going to submit that it should matter to you if you are a humanist. Because I think consciousness is central to humanism. So, to defend this proposition, let me first admit a fundamental human limitation. Philosophy 101. Nobody, myself included, can know without a doubt that any other conscious creature is having a conscious experience. Freshmen in philosophy classes love to say, well, how do I know that you're having an experience like mine? And my answer is, I don't know. Now can we move on? Because you really can't know that without a doubt. All you can know is that you are having a conscious experience. And you can assume other people are having an experience roughly similar to you perceiving the world and your bodies in space and in your memory over time. But we can't be certain. I do like to say, by the way, I think certainty is overrated. As a side point, I just want to reassure you, I see plenty of evidence that you all are having conscious experience right now. All right, I'm not going that far. But I don't dedicate my life to defending that it's a certainty or to finding out that it's a certainty. I'm too skeptical and life is too short to spend time focusing on that. But what I am absolutely certain of is that I am having a conscious experience, and that is why René Descartes' famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," is so fundamental to philosophy. It's almost a tautology to say it. I think, therefore I am, because it assumes that a thinking subject must have a thinking entity. It seems simply transparently true and undeniable that my thinking and my consciousness prove I exist. And for me, that existential truth that I'm experiencing the world of conscious experience at all is absolutely amazing. And as a naturalist, I don't think God has implanted conscious creatures in the world. So in this world of atoms and matter on this rock flying through space, the fact that I'm having a subjective experience to me is truly as close to miraculous as somebody with a scientific approach to the world can believe. On top of that, the fact that there are billions of other creatures out there that I assume are having similar experiences to me, experiences of joy and fear and pain and pleasure, is mind-blowing. It is one of the most awe-inspiring assumptions in life, I think. I'm awestruck by that. And so as a result, I'm not so interested as to whether a machine can pass the Turing test. I'm not so interested about whether circuitry or programming can create a machine that is good at imitating human life. What does fascinate me is the potential that the machines we create could actually have an inner experience, a point of view, like me and like I assume you. And I remember as a kid watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. How many of you have seen that film? It's pretty iconic. In it, the astronaut Dave is on a spaceship and Hal the robot is there, and they're the only two conscious creatures at this time, when Hal responds to a question Dave gives him. And Dave says, "Open the pod doors, Hal." And I remember when Hal answered as a kid, the hairs on my neck stood up. When Hal said, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." And what excited me was not the fact that Dave's life was now in danger and maybe the mission wasn't going to succeed, but the fact that Hal had an agenda, a point of view, a consciousness. There's a scene in Blade Runner when the Nexus 6 model named Pris says, "I think, therefore I am." And for me, again, what is exciting has nothing to do with imitating human consciousness or passing the Turing test. It's whether or not Pris herself is thinking. That she knows she's real and unique and worthy of respect. I mean, if she has no subjective experience, is not thinking or having an internal experience, if Hal doesn't have consciousness, then these moments in film, to me, are not as exciting or ethically important. So I'm going to move towards my conclusion. And I want to emphasize that what is ethically important to me involves consciousness in relationship. I think ethics is about how one sentient entity that experiences joy and frustration and pain and pleasure affects another sentient entity that experiences the same. What matters in a relationship between conscious, objective thinkers is those experiences from the inside out. Whether those creatures are human, or other animals, or machines. So unless Theodore's apt Samantha is actually experiencing something, then Theodore's relationship is less intriguing and of less ethical weight. It's the potential that the hologram in Marjorie Prime is having subjective experience that intrigues and fascinates me and, I think, demands moral consideration. And unless the replicants in Blade Runner are like other sentient creatures, it doesn't matter if Deckard kills them or marries them. Now, I want to be clear about one detail. If for one reason or another, these non-sentient machines, these pieces of hardware, mean something to a sentient creature, then I think ethical considerations are important. So, if Deckard loves Rachel, I don't think I can just go ahead and throw Rachel out without taking ethical considerations into the impact of Deckard, who's having an experience. Just like if you wanted to destroy a Rodin sculpture, and I love Rodin, you'd have to take into account my love of Rodin. So I'm not saying you can do whatever you want with the material world. But what animates me about these movies and this topic is the potential that machines that we create will evolve sufficiently to develop an interiority, an inner life of sensation and feeling and hope. And for the record, currently, I don't think computers have interior consciousness. I'm not certain. As I said, I could be wrong. As I said, I don't think we can be certain of anything or any conscious being other than ourselves. I'm pretty confident you're having an experience, roughly similar to mine. I'm also confident that many animals, especially mammals and creatures with a lot of neural activity, are having conscious experience. But for various empirical and intuitive reasons, I don't think that rocks are conscious. I don't think mushrooms are conscious. But I move through the world assuming there's a sliding scale of consciousness. And as creatures or entities seem to develop what appears to me to be a subjective experience, I begin to treat them with ethical concern. I want to emphasize, though, my point is not an empirical point about what is experiencing what, whether machines can. That's not my point. What my point is, what matters is subjective experience, the ability to feel pain and pleasure and joy and frustration. Now, futurists, people who study the future, will talk about the potential of the singularity. The singularity is the moment in time when the line between humans and machines disappears, when brains and hardware are basically the same, or mind and software are basically the same. And it might occur. But again, what matters to me is the link between sentient experiences. And whether that entity is biological or a solid state doesn't matter. What matters in both real life and science fiction is subjective experience. So wherever you stand in the position of whether machines are having an interior experience of consciousness and joy and pain, I think that what matters is consciousness. And until I am convinced that a computer app or a cell phone has experience, I'm going to be more concerned about how those machines affect other conscious entities, human and other animals. And yet, for me, I don't believe it's computers. I may be wrong. One of you may stand up right now and say, yeah, I'm a replicant and I am hearing you. That's why I love these sci-fi movies so much. They reanimate my awe over the incredible natural miracle of consciousness. Thank you very much.